Ever get that rush of nostalgia? You know that feeling when you think back to those classic family game nights? The clatter of dice, the smell of popcorn, the thrill of bankrupting your relatives in a heated game of Monopoly. Well, tonight we're going deep, deep, deep into the world of that very game, a game that's been a mainstay in living rooms for what feels like forever. But what if I told you that the story you think, the rags to riches tale of Charles Darrow, well, what if it's just that, a story?
Yeah, it really is fascinating how a game so deeply embedded in our culture, in our collective consciousness, even has a history that's, well, kind of shrouded in a bit of myth and, to be honest, a bit of deception.
Deception. Now that piques my interest.
Right, yeah.
You got to admit, I'm a bit skeptical, though. I mean, everyone knows, right? Darrow invented Monopoly during the Depression.
Right. That's the story that Parker Brothers really successfully sold. But the truth is much more complex, I think, and it all starts decades earlier, actually. We're talking the Gilded Age, a time of immense economic growth, but also stark inequality. So picture this for a second. Opulent mansions, groundbreaking inventions, but alongside it, widespread poverty and labor unrest. That's the backdrop, the real backdrop against which our Monopoly story begins.
So we're going back in time even before the Roaring Twenties. Color me intrigued. Tell me
Oh.
more.
Okay, so imagine this. It's the late 1800s, and we have this woman named Lizzie McGee. Now, Lizzie was a suffragist and an inventor with a real passion for social justice, and she was deeply troubled by that growing gap between the haves and the have-nots.
It's amazing, right, how certain issues they transcend time. That concentration of wealth and power, it's something we're still dealing with today.
Absolutely. And Lizzie McGee, she was ahead of her time in recognizing this. She was really influenced by the ideas of Henry George. He was an economist who believed that land ownership was at the root of that inequality. He actually proposed this single tax on the value of land, a pretty radical idea at the time aimed at discouraging speculation and making housing more affordable.
Interesting. So instead of taxing income or goods, he wanted to tax the very foundation of wealth, the land itself. That's certainly a bold approach. But how does this tie into monopoly? What's the connection?
Well, Lizzie McGee was really captivated by this idea, and she wanted to find a way to explain it to people to make them see the inherent unfairness of the system. And so she thought, what better way to do that than through a game?
A game. That's a really unique approach, actually. So was it like those educational games we had as kids? The ones that tried to make learning fun?
Well, yeah, sort of. Lizzie created this board game called the Landlord's Game, which, believe it or not, had some really striking similarities to the Monopoly we know and love today. It had properties, rent, even a go-to-jail space.
Wow. So many of the elements that we just take for granted in monopolies, they were already there in Lizzie's game all the way back in the 1800s.
But here's the real kicker. Lizzie's game wasn't just about buying properties and amassing wealth. She actually designed it with two sets of rules. One set encouraged players to become those monopolists, to crush their opponents and accumulate all the wealth, but the other set promoted a more cooperative approach. It rewarded players for creating wealth that benefited everyone.
So essentially you could play the same game with two totally different philosophies in mind. That's a pretty brilliant concept.
Exactly. It was a tool for education and debate. Imagine families gathered around the table, not just rolling dice, but actually discussing the merits of different economic systems.
Now you got me wondering what those conversations must have been like. Did people lean one way or the other? Monopolist versus cooperative? It's fascinating to think about.
Unfortunately, we don't really have a record of those individual conversations. What we do know is that the game resonated with people. It started to spread organically, with players making their own localized versions, adapting it to reflect their own communities.
So it was like a grassroots movement, spreading a message of economic fairness one game night at a time. That's amazing.
Yeah, it truly is. And yet, despite its popularity and its impact, Lizzie McGee's name, it kind of faded into obscurity. And then enters Charles Darrow. He's an unemployed engineer who, during the depths of the Great Depression, encountered a version of the landlord's game in Atlantic City.
Ah, so this is where we get to that classic
Right.
tale, the struggling inventor striking gold during tough times, the American dream in action.
Exactly. Darrow saw the game's potential, streamlined it, partnered with Parker Brothers, and marketed himself as the sole inventor. And his rags to riches story, it really resonated with a nation struggling to recover from economic devastation.
It's a powerful narrative, isn't it? The idea that anyone can overcome adversity through hard work and ingenuity. Classic American dream.
Absolutely. But in this case, that success came at the cost of truth. Lizzie McGee, she did try to reclaim her invention. She even received a small payout from Parker Brothers, but ultimately her name, it was erased from the game's history.
It's a shame, really. A woman creates a game to expose the flaws of monopolies, and then that very system profits from her work. And to think her name almost vanished from history.
It really makes you think about how narratives are shaped, how one version of events can just overshadow another, especially when powerful forces are involved.
That's like poetic irony, right?
Right.
Lizzie McGee's game meant to show the problems with monopolies gets repackaged and becomes a symbol of, cutthroat capitalism.
Yeah, the irony is definitely there. But the story doesn't stop there. Even as Monopoly was becoming a global phenomenon, especially in the post-war boom, Lizzie McGee's ideas, they didn't totally disappear. Her game and that powerful message, well, it would resurface in a pretty surprising way.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. Did people start to question the whole Darrow story?
Well, not immediately. It wasn't until the 1970s, actually. The oil crisis was happening. There was all this economic anxiety. And that's when we see a challenge to the monopoly narrative emerge. And this challenge, it came in the form of a new game, a game called, get this, Anti-Monopoly.
Anti-monopoly. You can't just drop that and not tell me more. Who made it? What was the point of it?
So the creator of Anti-Monopoly was this guy, Ralph Anspach, an economics professor, who was really concerned about the growing power of big corporations and how monopolies affected people's lives. He saw how real-world monopolies were driving up prices and making it harder for people to get essential things.
So he fought back using the same format as Monopoly to basically challenge the whole idea. That's pretty clever.
It was a bold move for sure. Anspach's game flipped the script on Monopoly. Instead of players getting rewarded for amassing wealth and crushing everyone else, Anti-Monopoly encouraged players to break up monopolies and promote fair competition.
I bet Parker Brothers were not happy about this. Did they try to shut him down?
Oh yeah, they did. They took Anspach to court, claiming trademark infringement. What started as a legal battle over intellectual property quickly turned into this much bigger fight, a fight over the truth behind Monopoly's origins.
Classic David versus Goliath story.
Hmm.
One economics professor taking on a giant corporation to expose the truth. It's like something out of a movie.
Exactly. And Anspach, he was determined to win. He went on this incredible search for evidence, traveling all over, talking to anyone who had played the landlord's game in its early days. He interviewed families who had passed down the game for generations, collecting all these stories that contradicted the Darrow narrative.
He was like a historical detective piecing together a forgotten past. So what did he find? What did all that digging uncover?
He found tons of evidence. He found people who had learned the game from Lizzie McGee herself, others who had played different versions of it way before Darrow said he came up with it. He even tracked down the couple who had taught Darrow the game, and they were furious about him taking credit for it.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like he built a pretty solid case. But what about the lawsuit? Did he win?
Unfortunately, no. Even with all that research and all those arguments, Anspach lost the legal battle. The courts sided with Parker Brothers, and that cemented the Darrow myth in everyone's minds.
It's like they say sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, but in this case, fiction won out. So even with all this new evidence, Lizzie McGee was still forgotten.
Yeah, for a while. But Anspach's fight, it did get more people interested in the story. He planted seeds of doubt about the official narrative.
So the truth was out there just waiting for the right moment to come to light. When did that happen? When did Lizzie McGee finally get her due? It's like you said, truth has a way of finding its way out, even when it's buried under a mountain of, corporate spin. So when did Lizzie McGee's story finally make a comeback?
Well, it took some time, but things started to change in the early 2000s. I think there was this growing awareness of social justice issues, and people were getting interested in those forgotten stories. And that's where Mary Pylon comes in. She was a journalist who came across Anspach's story, and she was hooked immediately.
A journalist with a knack for a good story and a hidden history waiting to be uncovered. Sounds like a movie waiting to happen. So what did she do with all this new info?
She did what any good journalist would do. She started digging. She tracked down Anspach, interviewed him like crazy, and went through all his research. She even dove deep into Lizzie McGee's life, trying to piece together the story of this amazing woman who'd been almost erased from history.
It's really inspiring how one person's passion, their drive to find the truth, can make such a difference. It's like Anspach's work paved the way for Pylon to bring Lizzie McGee's story to the world.
Exactly. Pylon wrote this book called The Monopolists. It came out in 2015 and became a huge bestseller. And it brought Lizzie McGee's story to a whole new audience. What's interesting is that the book came out right around the time of the Occupy Wall Street movement, when there was all this focus on economic inequality and corporate greed.
Talk about perfect timing. It's like Lizzie McGee's warnings about unchecked capitalism, they were suddenly relevant again, a century later.
It was a powerful reminder that the issues she was fighting for back then were still very much alive. And it wasn't just Occupy Wall Street. The 2008 financial crisis, the widening gap between the rich and everyone else, all these things contributed to people taking a fresh look at Lizzie McGee and her game.
It's wild to think about, right? How a board game, something we usually associate with fun and family, can actually represent such complex and serious issues.
It shows you the power of games. They're not just entertainment, they're reflections of our culture, our fears, our hopes. Monopoly, in a lot of ways, it's become this mirror reflecting how we think about wealth, success, the American dream, all of that.
So where does this leave us? Us, the players, the ones who roll the dice, build those houses and hotels, and try to avoid landing on boardwalk when someone owns it. What does this all mean for us?
I think it's a reminder that even the things we think we know, even the stories we've heard a million times, often have hidden layers and surprising origins. The next time you play Monopoly, think about Lizzie McGee, her vision, her struggle for economic justice. Remember that the game can be played in different ways with different outcomes. Does it really show that anyone can achieve the American dream? Or does it highlight the inequalities that are already built into the system?
Big questions to ponder while you're building your real estate empire. It goes to show you that even a simple game can get us thinking critically and challenge our assumptions about the world.
Definitely. And maybe Lizzie McGee's story will inspire some of us to dig a little deeper, to question the narratives we've been given and uncover those hidden histories all around us.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey, this deep dive into the world of Monopoly. We've uncovered a forgotten inventor, a corporate cover-up, and a game that's still sparking debate and conversation over 100 years later.
And just like a good game of Monopoly, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep playing.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Monopoly, be sure to subscribe for more unexpected journeys into the stories behind the things we think we know. Until next time.